Good morning. Well, I'm glad to see that some of you found out that on YouTube I had not, for some reason, uh, made them public. So somebody called me and told me they weren't on, and uh, I went and checked, and sure enough, they had not become public. So I had to change that. So hopefully this Sunday you'll be able to see it as it's supposed to be. As I record this today. Uh, your writer calls this section honor. It's about allegiance, about who do we give honor to, and what's the most important uh, in our lives. What's most important about giving allegiance or honor, and of course he comes up with the question to begin all this is, what is your highest allegiance in life? We have pledge allegiance that you and I grew up with, saying every morning in school, as it gives us emphasis and reminds us of our allegiance to our country as we pledge allegiance to the flag. Vacation Bible School, we do pledge allegiance to the United States flag, the Christian flag, and the Bible. If you can remember back that far for some of you. For the rest of us, it's what we did. And these uh, gave us information about allegiance, as we say, pledge allegiance. And it emphasized, especially in Vacation Bible School, about one, our national allegiance. Second was our Christian allegiance. And then also our emphasis on the Bible and how God's Word is so important to us that we hide it in our heart. Here, Jesus is in the section that we're going to study today in Matthew chapter 22. Matthew records these four challenges or questions or tests, you might say, to Jesus. And so we're going to look at the second and the fourth one specifically this morning. But that highest allegiance in your life, some would say, is that your family, your church? Is it Jesus? Which would be the answer to all kids if you asked them. uh, to your job or to your finances or to your hobby. What's your highest allegiance? And I hope for those listening today, especially, that the highest allegiance that you would do would be to God, or some would say Jesus. But even Jesus pointed us to God the Father all the time to remind us that He is the one to get the honor and glory as He deserves. And so, as we look at these questions, they try to trick Jesus in some of these spiritual as well as political um, tests that they're going to do. And so we'll start looking at that this morning about allegiance and how Jesus responded in these tests with wisdom and with confidence in what he believed. So the first is government authority, your writer talks about, and that's Matthew chapter 22, beginning with verse 15. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to trap him by what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. Teacher, they said, we know that you are truthful and teach truly the way of God. You don't care what anyone thinks, nor do you show partiality. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Perceiving their malicious intent, Jesus said, why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax. They brought him a denarius, whose image and inscription is this? He asked them. Caesar's, they said to him. Then he said to them, give then to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. All right. This testing is really, really interesting as they do. First of all, they come in with the compliments. And they say four statements right here about Jesus. They are true, and at the same time, they are recognitions that while they want to give compliments, they're also wanting to set him up. And I guess you'd say, it's kind of like a dad when his kids come butter him up or, hug on him and all, and you kind of know, okay, what do you want? Because you don't normally act this way. and and so Jesus also perceives when you start with the platitudes that something's up. It's a test. And so he's aware of it. He understands it. He has no problem with it. But listen to these four statements that they start off on here. And you'll notice that it's not only the disciples of the Pharisees that are sent, it is the Herodians. Now, this is very interesting because this is the first time they're mentioned, the Herodians. And you say, who are the Herodians? Well, the Herodians were actually political families that had influence and all by Herod. That's why they're called the Herodians. They were members of that family. They were supporters of that political influence. And they had come down for the festival. And so they joined them because this is what they want to know. This is a political question as well as a spiritual question, and they're trying to trap Jesus. They're saying, okay, now no matter which way he answers, either the Pharisees have got him or the Herodians got him and can bring him up on charges of being against the Roman government, because the Herodians were supporters of Rome. That's how they got their title. That's how they got their power. It was an office that Rome gave to Herod. And so they were there to try to also help catch Jesus, either on the spiritual side or on the political side. And so when this question then is asked about paying taxes, they were either going to get the people upset, and the Pharisees would be excited, or else the Pharisees would be upset because of the spiritual question. So either way he went, they thought they had him trapped. Now, notice these four statements that they talked to Jesus about. One, they said, teacher. Now, Matthew always, when somebody says teacher, they're an outsider. They really don't know Jesus. They're not a follower of Jesus. They're just using this title, teacher, in order to sound nice. But the first thing they say, we know you are truthful. This is about Jesus' integrity. Jesus had shown them through his 3.5 years of ministry here that he was truthful. He was a man of integrity. And they recognize that and say it. We know you are truthful. And second statement is teach truthfully the way of God. And that is correct too. In fact, that's his message, is about following the way of God. So they nail that as well. Third, they said, you don't care what anyone thinks. Now, that sounds kind of bad, as though he's arrogant, but that's not what they're meaning to. They're just meaning that you don't consider um, uh, the relationships or the political motivations or the spiritual motivations. You're not always trying to please everyone. Instead, they use that term. You don't care what anyone thinks, and it was a way for them to say that Jesus was not influenced by others. And the fourth one is you do not show partiality or favoritism. Um, he wasn't swayed by that. He was his own person. He always followed God. As he said, he didn't speak unless the Father told him, and he didn't do unless the Father showed him that's what he should do. So it was very important in his life. So all four of these statements are true, and they realize this. It's also kind of buttering up. And so they asked this question. Tell us, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? This was the trick questions. That's why the Herodians there. If he said you shouldn't pay taxes, the Herodians got him. If he says you should pay taxes, then the people would be upset because they hated paying taxes. And you have to remember these taxes was a day's wage, and it had to be paid in a denarius. That was the coin, the Latin coin, the Roman coin of the realm, where all business transactions went through it. Now the Jews had their own coin. It had nothing on it. It was a copper coin, and they used it for the temple tax. They paid taxes at the temple as they went in, and it was always these copper coins, because the Jews felt like the denarius, um, this Roman coin, had some things on it that was against their religion. One side of it, as we're going to see, had the picture of Caesar, and on the other side was Latin uh, inscriptions on there where even called him divine, called Caesar divine. And they hated that because, only God's divine. And they felt like it was idolatrous to have Caesar's picture on there as well. In fact, this is how Jesus responds to the question. He says, um, I know what you're doing. Look at verse 18. Perceiving their malicious intent. He knew they were trying to trap him. Jesus said, why are you testing me, hypocrites? You come in acting like you really care about who I am, what I do, my thoughts, my actions, but you're hypocrites. You don't. You're just trying to catch me in a trap. He said, you're trying to test me. This is amazing. He says, show me the coin used for the tax. So, talking about the poll tax, the taxes that Romans did had to be paid in the money of the realm, which was the denarius. And so he says, whose image and description is this? The denarius coin, he holds it up and asks them. Well, they give the correct answer because there's no lying about it. The picture on there is Caesar's. In verse 21, they say it's Caesar's. Then Jesus gives them this answer. It shocks everybody. Give then to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. His picture's on the coin. This coin belongs to him. Give what belongs to Caesar to him, the poll tax. And to God, the things that are God's. Well, God owns everything. He's talking more than coin. He's talking about your life, who you are. You created in the image of God. You belong to God. So, okay, give to Caesar what's Caesar's and to God what's God. So he totally fools that. Why? Because he solved the political question. Well, if that's Caesar's coin, give it to him. But if you belong to God, you need to give God. And that's the part that the Pharisees didn't do. They belonged to God, but they did not want to give themselves up to God. They liked their power. They liked their um, double standards, as Jesus called them, hypocrites, with this. And when they heard it, it says they were amazed. That's right. He answered the question, and it was not a trap. He solved it, and they walked away upset. The writer gives this question. He says, why do you think Jesus gave the lawyer, uh, excuse me, what does it look like to honor government today? What does it look like to honor government today? Well, April 15th was just last week. So, yeah, we all had to pay taxes or get a refund from paying taxes, something like that. So, yeah, you and I are pretty familiar with what we owe the government. It also means we recognize the authority that government has over us, and that is to collect taxes, to levy laws so that we can keep the peace, to be in charge of courts and rules of administration so that we can have a society that where we can live peacefully. Now, the Romans did the same thing, but the Jews did not like the Romans because they had conquered them. Now, for us in America, we are democratic, so we vote um, who we want to be our leaders. Now, we don't always even get who we vote for, right? Because there's more than one party. There's more than one person running. Usually, there's a slate of people, and you choose who you want to vote for. And in America, the majority then makes their choice, and that's the person that wins election, either locally, statewide, or even national. It was not that way in their day and time, where Caesar was emperor. He was in charge of everything, and they had a senate, yep, that was by Romans from Rome that helped make laws, and Caesar would enforce them and protect them by having the army and things like that. So um, today, what does it look like to honor our government in today's culture? Well, we're obligated as citizens of the United States to follow the rules and laws. That's part of our Pledge of Allegiance, right? But at the same time, we know that government has a limited amount of control over us um, because we live as free. We get to make decisions and choices as long as they don't interfere with the rights and privileges of others, that our country has developed these laws and protections in order for us to help have a peaceful uh, uh, opportunity to live our lives. So we can choose to honor the government in many ways. And sometimes when we feel the government is wrong, we can protest. We can elect officials who change the law. So we have a system in place that, we can honor our government. And if there are some changes that need to be made, we do them peacefully through our voting to get the changes that need to be done in order to help the majority of society. Now, does that mean everybody is always in agreement? No, we know that. We have disagreement even among people who say they're of the same party. Just like we say, if you're a Republican, there's conservative Republicans, there middle of the road Republicans, and there's liberal Republicans. The same way on the Democratic side or um, the independent side, there's different levels of where people agree. Why? Because you can't please everybody, and all of us each have individual ideas. That's why our framers of our Constitution really tried to say, we're going to make you work to an agreement where no one really likes the agreement. You don't get your way. You have to compromise. Everybody has to compromise. And so that's the way our framers chose to do that, because everybody is so different and they learned that. And they decided that this was the best way, unique way of framing government. We were the first ones to have many of these ideas instituted into a single government. And it has lasted and has helped. And yes, it's not perfect. The framers never said this was perfect. They said this seems to be the best way that they framed for our country. And it has worked for a long time. We'll have some anniversaries this year, so we're excited about those. But how do we honor our government? Well, you do your best to follow the rules and laws that our people throughout history have chosen to bring down to us. And when those laws change or we feel are unjust, we have the right to change leadership and change the laws. But at the same time, our allegiance is limited because we have a greater allegiance, as Jesus referred to. This greater allegiance is God owns everything, and especially us. And so our greater allegiance should be to God, not our country. Our country can't solve all the problems, but our God can. Let's look at the second, really the fourth argument that's presented to Jesus here. And he's tested for the fourth time in verses 34 through 40. And it's about God's authority. So let's look into it. They go back and they sent another group, as you know, in between these passages here, which are the Sadducees, and they have a question about resurrection. Even though they didn't believe in the resurrection, they had a question about it. Jesus answers that question. And so now the Pharisees go back and they get a teacher of the law. They get somebody who's an expert at asking questions and understanding the law. And they bring him to Jesus to test him. Why? They have had debates for years among the rabbis about this question that the teacher of the law is going to ask. And they think they got him trapped. And so they come with a prepared trap, a prepared question, and they think either way he answers, he'll be in trouble. Once again, Jesus is in charge. So let's read this, starting at verse 34 through 40. It says, when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced or muzzled the Sadducees, they came together, and one of them, an expert in the law, asked a question to test him. Teacher, which command in the law is the greatest? And he said to him, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important commandment. The second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets depend on these two commands. So here's the question, what's the greatest commandment? That they have debated that for centuries, I guess you'd say. And now they bring it up. These schools that had gone around with different teachers had debated on which law was the most important, which commandment's the most important, all of those things. And so they bring this to Jesus to see which school is he from, which one he thinks is most important, and no matter what, somebody's going to disagree. Or at least they thought they would. So when Jesus answers this, he brings it, instead of which one, is which two. Because Jesus answers with two commands. So your writer has a great question here for yourself to think about and for your class. Why do you think the lawyer had two commands instead of one? Why do you think Jesus gave the lawyer two commands instead of one? Why two answers instead of one? Think about that. He asked him what's the greatest, but Jesus answered with two. Well, there's a lot of debate on why Jesus did this, but it's from the Father. If you remember, the Ten Commandments were written by God and given to Moses on the mountain, and he took those tablets down. Of course, the first ones were destroyed because of their rebellion. They were worshiping a golden calf, and Moses destroyed those. But it wasn't long after the punishment and everything settled down that God told Moses to cut two more tablets and bring them up on the mountain. And we get the Ten Commandments that come down. In these Ten Commandments, if you remember, there are two sections. The first four commands deal with God and our relationship to God. The next six commands deal with our relationship with other human beings, with man. So you might say there are two distinct representations that God was concerned about in the Ten Commandments. One was the vertical, which is our relationship with God, and the other is horizontal, which is our relationship with man. And so these are very important to God and equally important to God because they're all included in the Ten Commandments. So when Jesus summarized all of the Ten Commandments into these two, and he says the greatest one, though, is about our relationship with God. That's the most important one. Without this first commandment there, we don't have any basis for the second, or the second six laws that God gave to us as humans through the Ten Commandments. So we must understand that this is very consistent. The Bible is totally consistent from beginning to end. That it's about God. And God is also concerned about all the other human beings on earth besides us. He loves us. And he loves everyone else too. And he's trying to teach us that. Jesus, God's own Son, answers this question with these two answers. Listen again to the two answers. What's the greatest command in the law? What's the greatest? Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important command. Now, notice he didn't say just the greatest. He also said the most important. This first one, and it's not a Ten Commandment. It's called the Shema. The Shema is the emphasis that God placed on Israel, that this in itself is so important that they were to repeat it twice a day. They were to repeat this command, love the Lord your God. Now, Jesus, according to Matthew here, Jesus changed it just a little bit with the third one. Instead of strength, he uses mind, which you have to understand in the Greek thinking. This makes this command all inclusive when it says, love the Lord with all your heart. That was the kind of the seat of emotions. And love with all your soul, which is your being, your uh, intellectual, social, religious makeup. And then he used mind, the Bible actually in Shema, strength. But the mind is in all your decisions. Your strength was considered Old Testament ideology, that your strength was part of all your decisions you did. And so he used the Greek idea of mind, which is equal to strength, the same of all your decisions. And in each one, he said all of your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, to include our whole being, everything that we are. We are to love the Lord your God with our everything, you might say. He said this is the greatest and most important commandment. There's no Jew who could disagree with that. God emphasized that they were to repeat this prayer twice a day. They were all supposed to write it and put it in their phylacteries, which was a little box on the head or arm or on their doorpost, outside their door, to remind themselves this is the most important thing, is our relationship with God as individuals. That's the most important. The greatest and most important was these words of loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And they said it twice a day. They had it on their doorpost. They had it where they carried it around with them every day. It was that important, so that nobody could deny that this was not, they could all agree to this most important. So it wasn't a trick. It was, I thought he might say something else, but they didn't. But notice that Jesus did not stop there, because the Ten Commandments is also a relationship to men. And it's so important to God that that's why he said this is second. You notice the Ten Commandments? The first four commandments are about God and how special he is, and how we're not to have any other gods before them, or not make any graven images. Things like that. God was our God, one God. And he's that important. He got the first four commands. But God loves human beings, and their relationship to each other is so important. The next six all deal with those relationships. Honoring your father and your mother, and then do not, kill, steal. All of those commandments that are given there are about our relationship to other people. So Jesus says this as to sum up that second half of the Ten Commandments. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets, he's talking about the whole Old Testament, depend or hang on, like a door hangs on hinges. This is the hinge. They all hang, the law and the prophets, which was the whole Old Testament Bible, hinge or hang on these two commands. Your writer has a question. What's at the heart of this command to love other people? What's at the heart of it? Yeah, you got to wrestle with that a little bit. What's at the heart of loving other people? Well, because God gave us the instruction, and Jesus gave us the summation. Loving other people is very important to God, so it should be very important to us. As Jesus said, for the normal Jew, Israelite, you might say, they thought that your neighbor was another Israelite or another Jew. But Jesus taught them the Good Samaritan parable story that it's whoever you meet is your neighbor. And this means we are open to have the same loving relationship to everyone you meet. That's the way God does it. And that's the way we should do it. And so this heart is God's heart to love all people. Well, how do you demonstrate this? You can come up with some ideas. How do you demonstrate loving other people? God's type of love, as we know from Paul's writing in 1 Corinthians 13, God's type of love is different than most of ours that we're used to. God loves not because we're like somebody else or what they can do for us. You love God's type of love, expecting nothing in return. It's a character of God's heart. Love is. Paul says, there remains faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. So loving God is first. Our devotion, our allegiance to God is very first, the greatest and most important commandment. But the second is like it. Why? Because you're loving God. And God also wants you to love everybody else. Those individuals He put into your path, just like He created all of us in His image, we are to love. Sounds easy, but it's hard. To demonstrate this, we must take each person we meet one-on-one basis and decide how to demonstrate God's love to that person. It could be listening. It could be encouraging. It could be meeting a basic need. But each person we meet, God expects us to demonstrate His love to them, what they need. Well, honoring God. Yeah, we honor God by loving Him and loving other people He puts in our path every single day. Hope you'll do that. Hope you'll follow this great command to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. May God bless you this week.